Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. You see what it is? Your boy Stingray Cool back. We in a third installation of the jazz. So you know the history of jazz music. Just got paid today, so my string yard back on. So let's continue the information. And first read John 3:16, Mark chapter 12, and Psalm chapter 11. And here we go. Swing in the early 20th century. Morton loosened ragtime's rigid rhythm feelings, decreasing of the establishment, and employing a swing feeling. Swing is the most important and enduring African-based rhythmic technique used in jazz. An oft-quoted definition of swing by Louis Armstrong, uh, or it might be some people know it as saying Louis Armstrong, but I just say Louis. Now I'm gonna say Louis because people used to the name Louis Armstrong stated the swing in an intangible rhythmic momentum in jazz. Swing defies analysis. Claims of the presence may inspire arguments. The dictionary does nothing less provide the usual description of triple subdivisions of the beat contrasted with double subdivision. Mhm. Swing suspicious six subdivisions of the beat over a basic composed structure of four subdivisions. The aspect of swing is far more prevalent in African American music than in Afro Caribbean music. One aspect of swing, which is heard in the more rhythmical, complex diaspora music, plays strokes in between the triple and the double bass grids. New Orleans brass bands are lasting influence, contributing horn players in the world of professional jazz with the distinct sound of the city, which helping black children escape poverty. The leader of New Orleans, Camilla Brass Band, Djama Garner, taught Louis Armstrong to play trumpet, helping black. Let's see, Armstrong would then popularize the New Orleans style of trumpet playing and then expand it. Like Jelly Roll, Morton Armstrong is also credited with the abandonment of ragtimes, stiffness in favor of swung notes. Armstrong, perhaps more than any other musician, codified the rhythmic technique of swing and jazz and broadened the jazz solo vocabulary. The original Dixieland jazz band made the music first recorded early in 1917 in their Lovely Stable Blues, becoming became the earliest released jazz record. 100, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106. That year, numerous other bands made recording featuring jazz in the title of the band name, but most were ragtime or novelty records rather than jazz. In February 1918, during World War One, James Reese Europeans Hellfighters Infantry band took uh infantry band took the ragtime Europe. Then on the return, recording Dixieland standards including Dark Town Strutter's Ball. The other regions. In the northeastern United States, a hot style of playing ragtime had developed, notably James Reese Europe's Sympathetic Cheek Cliff Club Orchestra in New Orleans, which played as benefit concert in Carnegie Hall in 1912. The Baltimore, that's something like that, I guess would be like their version of Social Awards. The Baltimore rag style and Yubiba Blake influenced James P. Johnson's development of stride piano playing, in which the right hand plays the melody while the left hand provides the rhythm and bass line. In Ohio and elsewhere in the Midwest, the major influence was ragtime until about 1930. 1919, around 1912, and when a four-string banjo and saxophone came in, musicians began improvising the melody line, but the harmony and rhythm remained unchanged. Contemporary account states that blues could only be heard in jazz in the gut bucket cabarets, which were generally looked down upon by the black middle class. Now we're going to the jazz age. God almighty. Might be a part four because it's a lot of information. Hold up. That's why I like this Wikipedia had they got the sample of the song so it give you an idea of the different variations of the jazz. So let me go look at my see if anyone in the comment section. But yeah, man. Alright, I had to make sure I did put part three and see was anyone in the chat. I'm reading off Wikipedia. Yeah, but Lou Armstrong changed the game of a lot of things. I guess he would say he's like the who's that guy? He'd be like the well, not Dr. Dre. He more like he'll be like the Kanye West. No, yeah, Dr. Dre rap too of jazz. How he changed up very different. All right, let me. Yeah, boy. All right, here we go. In 1920 and 1933, Prohibition in the United States banned the sales of alcoholic drinks, resulting in illicit speakeasies, which became a lively venue of jazz age. Hosting popular music, dance songs, novelty songs, and show tunes, jazz began to get reputations reputations immoral, and many members of the older generation saw it as a threat to the old cultural values by promoting the descended values of the roaring 20s. Henry Van Dyke of the Princeton University wrote, "It's not music at all, it's merely an irration of the nerves of hearing, sensual teasing, and strings of physical passion." The New York Times reported the suburban village used jazz to scare away birds, as the villagers had used pots and pans, and another story claimed that fatal heart attack of the celebrated conductor was caused by jazz. Man, this one set jazz up for it seemed like to me player haters. In 1910, Kid Ory's original Creole jazz band of musicians from New Orleans began playing in San Francisco and Los Angeles, where in 1922 they became the first black jazz band of New Orleans origins to make recordings. During the same year, Bessie Smith made her first recordings. Chicago was developing hot jazz, and King Oliver joined Bill Johnson. Bix Beiderbecke formed the Wolverines in 1924. Okay, now that they talk about the more the later decades now. Despite in the Southern black origins, there was a larger market of jazzy dance music played by white orchestras. In 1918, Paul Whiteman and his orchestra became the hit in San Francisco. He signed a contract with Victor and became the top band leader here we go, of the 1920s, giving hot jazz a white component, hiring white musicians such as Bix Beiderbecke, Jimmy Dorsey, Tommy Dorsey, Frankie Trumber, and Joe Venati. In 1924, Whiteman commissioned George German's A Rhapsody in Blue, which was premiered by his orchestra. Jazz began to be recognized as a notable music form. Olin Downs, reviewing the concert of the New York Times, wrote the Simpson show's extraordinary talent as it shows a young composer with aims that go far beyond those and of his ilk, struggling with a form in which he is formed for being extraordinarily talented, as it shows a young composer with aims to go far beyond those. Okay, here we go. The whole highly original form, his first theme master, in spite of all his, he was expressed himself as a significant and on the whole highly organ original form. His first theme, it was it is an ideal of several ideals correlated and combined to verify in contrasting rhythms immediately intrigue the listener. After Whitman's band successfully toured Europe, a huge hot jazz orchestra and theater pit caught on with other whites, including Fred Warren, John Goldie, and Nathaniel Skilcrit. Tell these old school names. According to Mario Dunkel, Whiteman's success was based on a rhetoric of domestication, and according to which the had here we go back I had elevated and rendered valuable read white, a previously incarcerate read black kind of music had elevated a rendering valuable white men. Oh, here we go. White men's success caused the black artists to follow suit. Earl Hines, who opened the Grand Terrace White Mrs. Cafe in Chicago in 1928. Here we gotta scroll down. Duke Ellington, I know that name sounds familiar. Who opened the Cotton Club in Harlem, 1927. I think that's where that movie Something Go to Cotton. Cotton was based on with the late great Red Fox and a lot of old school actors was in it. I ain't 100% sure, but I think that's what the idea from that movie. Harlem Comes Cotton, I think. If I didn't say it right. Oh, it's Cotton Comes Harlem. Yeah, the other way around. My bad. But it was a cool cast of all the OGs of that time who paid the way for all of us entertainers, from the Michael J. Whites to the Wesley Snipes to the Bruce to the Martin Lawrence to Eddie Murphys. So this is this was like house party before there was a house party. Good movie. Yes, comes to Harlem. Had to just check it out. Yeah, that's what it's called. But it's an OG movie. It'll be different because like the younger people, well, I'm young, but the younger ones probably wouldn't get it right off the bat. But it's a good comedy historic movie. Earl Hines opened up for Grand Tasway. Duke Ellington, who opened up the Cotton Club in Harlem. Lionel Hampton, Fletcher, Henderson, Claude Hopkins, and Don Redman, with Henderson and Redman developing the talking to one another formula from the hot swing music. In 1924, Louis Armstrong joined Fletcher's Henderson dance band for a year as featured soloist. The original New Orleans style was polyphonic with the theme variation and simulations collected improvising. Armstrong was a master of his hometown style. By the time he joined the Henderson's band, he was already trailblazer in a new phase of jazz and the emphasis of arrangements in socialist. Armstrong's solos went well beyond the theme improvising okay, concert in extra parades of chords rather than melodies, according to Sosa. By comparison, the solos of Armstrong bandmates, including young Coleman Hawkins, sounded stiff, stodgy, with a jerky rhythm, rhymes, and a great undersized tone quality. The following example shows a short, expert, and straight melody in a Mandy Makeup for Up Your Mind by George W. Meyer. Well, Meyer. And Arthur Johnson top. Compared with Armstrong's solo improvisation below, recorded in 1924, Armstrong's solos were a significant factor in making jazz a true 20th century language. After leaving Henderson's group, Armstrong formed his Hot Five band where he popularized scat singing. Swing in the 1920s and 1930s. Think this more getting low to post-World War One era. In 1930s, belonged to popular swing big bands in which some virtuosos became as famous as the band leaders, key figures in developing the big jazz band, including band leaders and arrangers Count Basie, Cab Calloway. Basically, this one, Cab Calloway, one that hide ho, hide. One of the people influenced Bones as a horn. I mean, Busy Bones telling the story about his list of Cab Calloway and a lot of singers to develop their style. So I definitely remember that because Looney Tunes had a cartoon spoof. I think it was a duck being Cab Calloway, and they had all the old like AMC used to play the old videos with Cab Calloway in it. The brother was cool. I think he was like in a way the forefather of fast paced rap. because he was the first ever fast-paced singer of that time in the 1930s. But Jimmy Luchford, Harry James, Tommy Dorsey, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, Fletcher Henderson, Earl Hines, Glenn Miller, and Artie Shaw, all through it was collective sound. Swing also offered individual musicians a chance to solo and improvise melodic, thematic solos, which could at times be complex, important music. Over time, social structures regarding racial segregation began to relax in America. White band leaders began to recruit black musicians and black band leaders white ones. In the mid 1930s, Benny Goodman hired pianist Teddy Wilson and vibraphonist Lionel Hampton and guitarist Charlie Christian to join small groups in the 1930s. Kansas City Jazz, as amplified by tenor saxophonist Lester Young, marked the transition from big bands to the progression, to the bebop influence of the 1940s and early 1940s style known as jumping the blues or jump blues. Use small combos, up-tempo music and blues chords progression, drawing on boogie woogie from the 1930s. I ain't know boogie woogie term been out that long. I thought it just debuted in the 80s, 70s, I meant to say. Learn something new every day. The influence of Duke Ellington. While swing was reaching the height of its popularity, Duke Ellington spent the late 1920s and 1930s developing an innovative musical idiom for his orchestra. Abandoning the convention of swing, he experimented with orchestral sounds, harmony, and musical form with complex compositions and still translated well for a popular audience. Some of his tunes became hits and his own popularity spanned from the United States to Europe. Ellington called his music American music rather than jazz, and liked to describe those who impressed him as beyond category. These included many musicians from his orchestra, some of whom are considered among the best in the jazz in their own right. But it was Ellington who melded, I meant to say, melded them into one of the most popular jazz orchestras in the history of jazz. He often composed for the style and skills of these individuals, such as Jeeps Blues for Johnny Hodges, Concerto for Cootie Williams, which later became Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me with Bob Russell's lyrics, and the Mooch for Tricky Sam Nanton and Bubba Miley. He also recorded compositions written by his bandsmen such as Joan Tizos, Curry Vine, and Perdido, which brought the Spanish ting to big band jazz. Several members of the orchestra remained with him in several decades. The band reached a creative peak of in the early 1940s when Ellington and a small hand-picked group of his composers and arrangers wrote for an orchestra of distinctive voices who displayed a tremendous creativity. So basically, he's like a very trendsetter, as they would say. No, basically, he like changed the game again years after Louis Armstrong did. Oh, hey, bad. Had to get some water off that. Got a little perch. The beginnings of the European jazz. As, uh, as only a limited number of American jazz records were released in European jazz traces many of its roots to American artists such as James Reese Europe, Paul Whiteman, and Lonnie Johnson, who visited Europe during and after World War One, and it was their live performances which inspired European artists audience interest in jazz, as well as the interest in all things American and therefore exotic, which accompanied the economic, political woes of Europe during this time. And the beginnings of the distinct European style of jazz began to emerge in this interwar period. British jazz began with a tour by the original Dixieland Jazz Band in 1919. In 1926, Fred Elizalde and his Cambridge up, undergrads began broadcasting on the BBC. Thereafter, jazz became an important element in many leading dances, orchestras, and jazz instrumentals became numerous. This style entered a full swing in France with the Quinte du Hot Club de France, which began in 1934. Much in the French jazz was a combination of African American jazz and symphonic styles in which French musicians were well trained, I should say. In this, it is easy to see the inspiration taken from Paul Whiteman since his style was also a fusion of the two. Belgian guitarist Django Reinhardt popularized gypsy jazz, a mix of 1930s American swing, French dancehall, musette, in case you want to spell it, Mussette, and Eastern European folk with a languid, seductive feel. The main instruments were steel, string, guitar, violin, and double bass. Solos passed from one player to another as a guitar and bass formed the rim section. Some researchers believe Eddie Lang and Joe Venuti pioneered the guitar violin partnership characteristics of the genre, which was brought to France after they had been heard live on EK Records in the late 1920s. Post-war jazz. You can see also jazz 1940s and jazz, 1950s and jazz, 1960s and jazz, 1970s and jazz, and album era. The outbreak of World War II marked a turning point for jazz. In the swing era, jazz of the previous decade had challenged the other popular music as being representative of the nation's culture, with big bands reaching the height of the style's success by the early 1940s. Swing acts and big bands traveled with U.S. military overseas to Europe, where it also became popular statewide. However, the war presented difficult for the big band format. Conscription shortened the number of musicians available. The military needed for shellac, Shellac, in case you want to spell it, commonly used for pressing gramophone. No, Gramophone. If you want to spell it, of course, no records, RECL or DS. Some of these words are like old school words, so I have a hard time pronouncing them. Some foreign words, but we're gonna get it. Many of the big bands who were deprived of experienced musicians because of the war effort put this down right quick. Like that. There we go. I had to put that down. The outbreak of World War II marked a turning point for jazz. The swing era jazz of the previous decades had challenged the other popular music as being representative of the nation's culture, with big bands reaching the height of the style success in the early 1940s. Swing acts and big bands traveled with U.S. military overseas to Europe, where it also became popular stateside. However, the war presented difficulties for the big band format. Conscriptions shortened the number of the musicians available. The military's need for shellac, commonly used for pressing gramophones records, limited record production. A shortage of rubber, also due to the war effort, discouraged the bands from touring via road travel, and a damage by the Musicians Union for a commercial recordings ban limited musical distributions between 1942 and 1944. Many of the big bands who were deprived of experienced musicians because of the war effort began to enlist young players who were below the age of conscription, as was the case with saxophone Stan Getz' entry in the band as a teenager. They conceded with a nationwide resurgence in the Dixieland style of the pre-swing jazz performers such as clarinets George Lewis, Cortez, Bill Davidson, and trombonist Turk Murphy were hailed by conversation jazz critics as more authentic than the big bands elsewhere. With the limitations on recording, small groups of young musicians developed a more up-tempo, improvisational style of jazz, collaborating with experimenting with new ideas of for melodic development, rhythm, rhythmic language, and harmonic substitution. During the information late night jam sessions hosted in small clubs and apartments, key figures in the development of were largely based in New York and included pianist Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell, drummers Max Roach and Kenny Clarke, saxophonist Charlie Park, the trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie, that name's not familiar. Bebop and subsequent post-war jazz development feature a wide set of notes played in more complex patterns and at the fast tempos than previous jazz. According to the Clive James, bebop was the post-war generally agreed that the exponents of post-war jazz were determined with good reason for to present themselves as challenging artists rather than tame entertainers. The end of the war marks a revival of the spirit of experimentation in musical pluralism. pluralism. Yeah, under which it had been conceived along with the beginning of a decline in the popularity of jazz music in America, according to American academic Michael H. Burchick. With the rise of bebop and the end of the ring era after the war, jazz lost its catch as pop music vocalists of the famous big bands moved on to being marketed and performing as solo pop singers. These included Frank Sinatra, Peggy Lee, Dick James. I know Frank Sinatra. I don't know the others. And Doris Day. I don't know Doris Day. I don't know Peggy Lee. Older musicians who still performed their pre-war jazz, such as Armstrong and Ellington, were gradually viewed in the mainstream as passe. Other younger performers, such as singer Big Joe Turner and saxophonist Louis Jordan, who were discouraged by bebop's increasing complexity, pursued more lucrative endeavors in rhyme and blues, jump blues, and eventually rock and roll. Some, including Gillespie, composed intricate yet danceable pieces for bebop musicians. Pieces for, here we go, in an effort to make them more accessible. But bebop largely remained on the Friends of American Artists' purview. The new direction of post-war jazz drew a wealth of critical acclaim, but it steadily declined in popularity as it developed a reputation as an academic genre that was largely accessible to mainstream artists. As Burchett said, the quest to make jazz more relevant to popular audiences while retaining its artistic integrity is a constant and prevalent theme in the history of post-war jazz. During its swing period, jazz had been an uncomplicated musical scene, according to Paul Trinka. This changed in the post-war years. All right, that's it for part three. Hold up, Southern jazz was no longer straightforward. There was bebop and its variants. There was the last gasp of swing. There was strange new brews like the progressive jazz of Stan Kenton, and there was completely new phenomenal called revivalism, the rediscovery of jazz from the past, either on old records or performed live by Asian players brought out of retirement. From now on, it was no good saying that you like jazz. You had to specify what kind of jazz, and that is the way it has been ever since. Only more so today. Today, the word jazz is virtually meaningless without further definition. So tomorrow we're gonna start with bebop. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe. You get the cash out dollar sign, sing cool support channel, but most importantly, hit that notification bell because sometimes people might not get noticed. So we out. Peace, love, and God bless. Shout out to Prime Energy Drinks. I taste that blue one today. That blueberry is delicious.